let's create multiple platforms and see how that feels like. See how the game performs, right? Because we ultimately, that's what the game is about. We want people to be able to jump up and down using these platforms. Just placing a few of these here. Okay. And let's just do a quick test. So I don't know if you noticed, but there's a small problem here. Let's try again. When I jump up against a platform, it stops me from going through because, well, the platform is blocking you, right? So that's not exactly how we want it to behave, like in Doodle Jump, right? So in Doodle Jump, you are allowed to go through the platform, and then when you come down, you'll land on it before you bounce again. And it's actually really easy to change that. Yeah, pay attention to this box collider here, right? So let me click on, let me just select the object that's currently blocking the player. If I just disable the box collider, the player will go through, right? Because it's not detecting the collision anymore. It's not a collider. The collider is deactivated. So all we need to do now is make sure that when the player is lower than the platform's collider is not active, and as soon as the player is above it, we turn the collider on and it starts to detect that collision. I clean up the scene a little bit so we can set this up a bit easier. So again, let's duplicate the platform and move that one up here. So I'm going to be designing using this one. And the original one, I will rename it to Platform Original just for now, just so that it's a little bit clear in the scene. Okay. So let's look at this platform. We need to make some modifications to it so that it enables and disables this collider depending on the position of the player. Right. And we already have a state machine here, so I'm going to change the name to player, well, I'll just call it jump, right? So this is the state machine that controls the movement of the player when the player lands on the platform. Okay, save that. And I'm going to add another state machine here, and then this is the one that's going to control the collider on the platform. So I'll call this, actually it's over here, I'm going to call the state machine collider control. Okay. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. What we need to do is we need to find a point near the player object. Well, actually, preferably, we want to find the bottom part, the bottom position, the Y position of this particular point here on the player object. Because if we use if we just use the player object and get position for that object, then we're going to get the position in the middle, which is not what we want, because we want to react to sort of the foot area of this player, right? This is where we're going to make the switch when the platform is lower than that. Then we're going to enable the collider. When the platform is above this particular point, then we are going to let the player go through it. So as you can see, we need a different point than the center of the player, right? So that's the first thing. We're going to need that point. We're going to compare that with the position of the platform, right? So so obviously we need two variables. So we're going to say player foot position, and then platform Y position. platform y position add. Okay, and I'm going to create an initialization state, and then this is when the game first starts. We want to make sure all the platforms know what they're doing, right? Before the players even started moving, we want to make sure that the platforms that are above the player knows they are not going to have the collider. The ones down below, they're going to know that they need the collider. So in the initialization state, we're going to do that right away. And then we're going to have a state that says enable collider, and then one that says disable collider. Right. I'm just designing the states right now. And then we're going to need events that when the player is above platform, that's one event. Player below platform, that's the other. Right. So I'm going to add these two events here. When the player is above the platform, we go to enable collider. When the player is below the platform, we disable the collider. Right. So that's the first thing. When the game starts, let's define if we want the collider on the platform or not. And then let's see how do we decide that? Well, we're going to need the y positions of these objects, right? And let's do this one thing first. So click on the player object, and then let's go to game object, create empty, and I'm going to name this foot point. So this is going to be the point we use to decide if this is the sort of like the anchor point that we're going to use. Remember, we're just talking about how we are going to use a point close to the bottom of the player character, the player object. So I want to make this a child object of the player, right? And what that does is when the player is moving, this point moves with it, right? Its relative position to the player object is the same. Now, to make this a little bit easier to see, because it's an empty game object, I'm going to just add a little icon to it. Okay. So now you can. Well, I don't think I did that. Apparently, Sunny has an opinion on this as well. But anyways. Let's try that again. Select icon. So now this point has a little icon on it, so you can see where it is. And I'm going to just reset position to 0, 0, 0. Now this 0, 0 position is actually the center of the parent object, right? And I'm going to just move this down a little bit, close to the foot area. But I don't want it to go all the way down. I wanted to sort of leave a little bit of error room there, because sometimes objects do go into each other a little bit. So let's just, okay, I think that's a good place to have that foot point. So that's the point we're going to use to detect the position of the player. Right, so let's go back to the platform here. And we're going to say, okay, get position, specify game object, and instead of using the player object, we're going to use the foot point. Right. Now again, because the foot point is part of the player object now, it's a child object of player. When you move the player object, you can see that the foot point object is moving with it. Right. So this is good that we can use that as a detection point. Right. So that's good. And we're going to store that in the player foot position variable. I'm going to do that every frame. Okay, so that gives us the position of this, the y position of this point. Now we want to get another one, get position, right? And then we're just going to use our own position here and store it as the platform y position. again, every frame. Make sure we're using world space here because we want to compare them sort of in the world space, not the local space. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we're just going to do a simple float compare. Then add it. I'll just drag this in. Okay, so the float compare action allows you to send different events based on the relationship between two floats. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare the player foot position to the platform Y position, and if it's equal, then we're going to say if it's equal, then we're going to say the player is below platform. We want the player to go through. If it's equal, if it's less than, then we still want to say, okay, you're below the platform. We want to disable the collider. But if it's greater, if this position is higher than the middle part of this point here, then we want to say, okay, you are above the platform, right? So essentially what we're doing is we're comparing this point, this foot point, with the center of the platform, right? So we're saying if this point is above, then we're going to turn you into a solid collider so you can bounce on it. If it's below, then we're going to sort of let you go through, right? So I think that should work. And again, we're going to do this every frame. Actually, initially, we're just going to do it once, so I think that's fine. We don't need every frame. Okay, so that's the first step. Now, we want to keep doing the same thing when the game is running, not just initially, right? So when a game is running, it might be in a different state. It might be in this state where it says enable collider, and then if the player goes below the platform, we want to switch to disable collider. So here I need to have a new event, transition, player below platform. So when the player is below platform, that's disable collider, and when the player is above the platform, that's re-enable it, right? Because the player object position is constantly changing, so we want to make sure that we can switch between these two different states. Okay, now let's add the collider enabler. I don't think there is a default action for this, right? Let's just take a quick look. Yeah, so we're going to use this particular action called set property, and this is a really powerful property. This is a really powerful action. So what it does is it allows you to get any property from any of the components and from any objects, right? So what we're going to do here is we're going to say, okay, target object is self object, drag that in, and the property here we want to, you can see that all the components and different attributes on the platform is displayed here, right? But what we are interested in is the collider. So we go to collider and enabled, right? And what we're going to do is simply check enable, right? Because we're enabling the collider, so we want to do that here. And I'm just going to copy that and paste it here and on check enabled. So that way, that will disable the collider. Right, okay. And now we need to do all the same actions. Here again, we need to compare the positions of these two objects. And then if it's too big or too small, then we're going to send them to, send the state, send to the other state. Right, so I'm just going to select them all, Control C to copy, and collapse that, and then just paste that. Right. So, and I need to adjust it a little bit because we're not going to try to send the state to the enable collider state because you're already in this state. So I'm going to remove that. We don't need that one. Okay, so we just need the equal and less than event. And let's go to the next state, and we'll do the same thing. All right, we paste that, and all we care is when the player is above the platform, we want to go to the other state and make sure that we're checking this every frame. Let me just double check. Right, need to do that every frame. Okay, so let's save that and see if that works. All right, so I'm just going to manually move this thing around. You can see that I'm above, the Y position is above the player foot point. So I'm in the disable collider state. And as soon as I move this down, you can see that in Playmaker, it starts to switch between the two, depending on the positions of the two. And what this does is, let's say if I have something like this, go through and they will jump. I don't know if that was obvious, but let's try that again. Right, so I think that would probably work very well. So let's go with that. Save, and let's go to the next. One slight problem I have with the current setup is I think the platform is switching to is enabling the collider a little bit too soon. Let me just demonstrate that for you, and you might have noticed this in the previously. But let's say if we have the platform here, oops. As soon as the object, the player goes through the platform, it enables the collider, and it basically creates the situation where you have the collision event happening when the let me just select it. You have the collisioning events happening when the object is sort of halfway through, because we're comparing the foot point with the center of the platform, which is not really ideal. I think ideally I want to compare the foot point with the top of the platform. So let's do that. So we're going to do the same thing with the foot point, but then here we're going to just create a top point for the platform. So it should be a quick fix. So again, let's create an empty game object. I'll just call this top point. Could be anything, any name really. Drop it into the platform so it's part of it. It's part of the parent group. And reset the position so it's now in the center. And again, I want to give it a label, but an icon so I can see it. Okay. So let me just reposition things a little bit. Right, so this top point, I want it to be close to the edge, but not quite. Maybe somewhere there would be fine. Okay, and then in the get position actions, we're going to have to use that point instead of the platform object itself. So we're going to use top point for that, and we're using foot point for the other. Let's just double check. Okay, again, here we're going to use the top point on the platform, we're using the foot point for the player, and finally this last state, change that point. Okay, save and play. Let's see. I'm going to move this away. Okay, so that works. And yeah, that works a lot better. So I don't know if you catch that, but It goes through properly, finishes the jump, and then jump again. So I think that works a little bit better than what we had before. Very good.